Tilburg University and MindLabs present TAISIG Talks, the podcast that keeps you updated on the latest developments in the field of artificial intelligence in just 1 hour.
Hello, welcome to this edition of the TAISIG Talks. TAISIG is the Tilburg Artificial Intelligence Special Interest Group of Tilburg University. In these talks, we try to focus on artificial intelligence research done at Tilburg University. Sometimes we talk about educational topics, but today this is about research, and in particular I'm going to talk about virtual reality and AI in virtual reality. I have two guests here, Phil Brown and Mavridou. So could the two of you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Phil Brown. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Intelligent Systems, and I also help to co-run the virtual reality lab at MindLabs. Research interests are broad applications of virtual reality, oftentimes in healthcare applications, but also quite interested in sensing, using different sensors and different modalities as well.
And my name is Mavridou. I'm an assistant professor at the Computational Cognitive Science Department, the sister department of the Intelligent Systems. My background is in virtual reality, extended reality, and multimodal sensing. I've worked for a few years before in the industry trying to develop actually some of the technologies used for sensing within virtual reality. And as Phillip said, I'm also co-running the virtual reality lab.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So when we talk about virtual reality, and we often other terms are brought in as well, like augmented reality, mixed reality, immersive experiences, so lots of terms which all relate to the same kind of topics. But there is a development over the last decades where I saw that virtual reality was not really being used, let's say 25 years ago, and then it started to come up. And we got lots of enthusiasm, and then evidently it was a sort of a disappointment phase where people thought, well, and then it spread out to other kinds of applications. So maybe you can go over this history a bit to set the scene, and well, you can talk in whatever order you want.
Shall I start?
Yeah, please.
I guess we have a lot to say about this, but maybe we can highlight some of the key moments in the history of virtual reality, because it's been, I guess, a history full of ambition and prospects and lots of funding, and we managed to get where we are today within 25 years or so. But let's start from the start. So we have some prototypes like the Sword of Damocles by Ivan Sutherland I think in the 1960s, and that really showcase what is possible, what can be done with virtual reality. And not so long after, we start having a Data Clove, another very nice prototype that showed that you can actually touch in virtual reality. Before that was possible. And then we have advancement over an advancement. And the reality is that for us, we haven't been able to use this in research, at least when I was a researcher, because it was used within very specific laboratories. It was very difficult to set up. So in the 2010s is when we start having the first commercial virtual reality headsets. That's when we start having the Oculus, for example. And when I was a master's student, I remember we all chipped in so we can all buy one headset so we can start researching with it. And that was fascinating what we can do. Then later on, as we can see from the Gartner's cycle of emerging technology, virtual reality had been for a while within the expectancies increases. And then we have the big hype towards the 2015 and 16. This is also the hype of inflated expectations, as we call it. And it creates a big bubble and high ambition for everyone. And we start having more and more headsets, I think, from a lot of companies which are big in high tech, and so on, up until about 2020. I think that's when we start having the peak of the metaverse, create the big sensation. That's another inflated expectation peak, and we've learned a lot from overpromising and where the technology was. And now we are steadily outside of the emerging tech cycle, because the technology now is mainstream, is out there. It has been developed and adopted by 170 million of people or so.
Yeah, and continuing to be, I think, as well. And you touched on it briefly there about 10 years ago with Oculus, I think, as well. And when they made a really commercially available headset, it took it out of those very expensive laboratory environments. And even if you take it back a little bit further, I think to what Peter mentioned at the start of this 25 years ago, and then there was a bit of that disappointment.
Yeah.
I remember anyway, growing up, you had things like the Virtual Boy and stuff like this, which were things developed by, Nintendo, for example, very well-known companies in the field of gaming. And I don't know if any of the listeners or anyone in this room has ever tried one of them, but it's absolutely horrible. You got about 30 frames a second. It makes you feel quite sick and you want to take it off as soon as you've put it on. Now, these issues still persist to this day, but if you really see that advancement and how we have maybe addressed these issues and how we're able to solve these issues, partly because of the availability of this equipment. It's very interesting.
But what was that hype then about? I mean, it's cool, but why was there a hype? What did people think they could do with it?
Well, it was a combination of things. We had better technologies, better sensors, we had more content, we had people who were actually trained in virtual reality, they were engineers who worked on it, there was more funding being pushed, there was more commercially accessible headsets and sensing technology. So all of a sudden we had all the tools available to deliver some of the visions we had in the past. So for training, entertainment, and simulation, for gaming, you name it.
Yeah, I can imagine that the hype was mostly that people look at that and think this is so cool. This is like the Matrix, and then I purchased that and I experienced a whole new world. And then you get a couple of disappointments in the applications. I mean, I have been disappointed with virtual reality in games, for instance, where it also gives so many limitations besides some cool aspects, also limitations with what you can do. While I can also imagine that the serious applications of virtual reality, like you mentioned training, but other application I can imagine as well, could be very useful, although that would not be a hype because that's not something that everybody then wants to have. Am I looking at this in the correct way? And these serious applications, are they also a disappointment, or what are good examples of that where VR is used?
Yeah, and I think something to touch on later with some of the projects that we've been doing, but exactly that. Myself personally, develop a lot of applications and with projects in healthcare domains, for example. So how can we use these experiences, and quite successfully as well, I may say. There are many applications where traditional treatment, for example, may not be possible and or may not be desired, and then for you can actually offer an alternative to this.
A treatment for what?
Could be a number of things. Myself, for instance, we look at sort of prospective memory training. We look at maybe with youths with learning disabilities, for example, or older adults pre-Alzheimer's in cases like that. So how can you maybe offer something which they've either not used before, maybe they've not become accustomed to or interacted before, and offer an alternative approach to that instead. But take it back even a little bit further. For instance, when we talk about this 20, 25 years ago, where this technology came from, the military has been very interested in this technology for a long time, not necessarily just virtual, but augmented mixed realities, which, different modalities, same sort of principles that are applied there. And again, training applications, which maybe if you can talk a bit more about in the future, she's got a couple of projects running in that domain. But again, very expensive purposes, and then maybe how we can take it away to say, flight simulations. We've had students who have graduated recently from here who have done stuff with flight training, for example. Very expensive tasks. How can we maybe do these in a more approachable manner and a more sustainable manner as well?
Yeah, I think, if I may add as well, the underlying principle of what virtual reality offers is why some of the visions that we have initially might have been more disappointing. But ultimately, virtual reality is not just the medium, is not just the technologies, is not just a plugging thing that we could set up at any point. It's a whole system of interrelated nodes that manages to make an experience so highly immersive and simulated that and controlled that we can use it for any kind of experimental processes. And that's why it's such a useful laboratory tool, really. You can set up any kind of scenario, an idea, anything you want to explore. You can set it up safely and with high creative control and high ecological validity within virtual reality.
Yeah, I can imagine that you can do that visually, but is it limited to visuals, or should we look beyond that? I can, especially when I think about augmented reality, for instance, where the actual reality should be there as well. Can you say something more about that?
Of course. I mean, for us, we started with mainly visual and motion activated interaction principles, but it's also the acoustic element. It's the haptics now that is more and more trendy, and we have more consumer technologies available to us. We have olfactory induction devices, so we can actually smell things. So if you can capture the majority of the senses, then you should be able to induce a more realistic, a more naturalistic scenario. And in there, we should have also more naturalistic responses by users.
Yeah, and I could add to that maybe a little bit as well, where sure we do often group uh, virtual extended reality into visual experiences. But the benefit of that, and maybe with some of the things you just mentioned there, is that immersion, is that level of presence which these immersive technologies are able to offer. Yes, we could have maybe offered different types of training or um, medical conditions or whatever it is in a 2D display, for example, in a traditional sense. But when you're able to actually have that immersive experience and able to adopt someone into that instead, that's really sometimes where the benefit can be. How do you get to that immersive experience? Visual, as I've just said, but then, smell, sound, interactions, haptics, these all play a part of it. And again, it sort of ties back to the start of this conversation a little bit, I think. That's where we've come from, where we have this primitive, so say, technology, and how we're able to iterate upon this again and again and really develop it into something now where um, it's almost come full circle, I think, in a lot of ways. Everyone saw this technology and thought, great, I can do anything with it. You have that level of disappointment then, oh, maybe I can't do everything with it.
Mm.
But now as we're actually starting to develop it, people have had 10, 12, 13 years with this more commercially available headsets. We're learning how to actually work with this. We're learning what the pitfalls are of it and what we can actually do to develop it further.
Absolutely. And also it's some of the software that comes with it, right? APIs, SDKs, you name it.
Yes, and I would agree or argue even that the software is something that has maybe been quite limiting with this for a long period of time. We have had large investment a lot of the time into the hardware of this, and many companies from Samsung to Apple to Google developing their own headsets. But how much investment is actually made for the experiences which people are going to be experiencing? Oftentimes very expensive to develop.
Mm.
Where are you going to put your money maybe as a developer? Are you going to make it um, for the movie or for the Xbox or whatever it is, which has X million number of people? Or are you going to have it for that more niche technology potentially in virtual reality? Um, there's an argument there for what can be done for both, but an example maybe once again would be the Apple Vision Pro, which has just come along, a very expensive headset, a very large niche in that regard. Although you still do have major developers and major manufacturers behind it developing this content, that needs to continue and it needs to be sustainable so that people don't put their headset on and say, it's the same two movies that I saw half a year ago. No, there's a constant stream of content and there's a constant stream of engagement there.
Absolutely. And what you mentioned about immersion and presence, I think we need to reemphasize that because it's a mental phenomenon that appears to be very prevalent in virtual reality. And it's the feeling of actually sensing as if you are in the room, as if you are in the virtual environment. Even though it's like Matrix, right? So as you mentioned, so you plug in and you start experiencing this new environment, but it's safe and you can unplug at any point you want. You know it's fake, right? So you know it's a fake environment, but somehow people respond to the stimuli in the same way they would have responded to a real stimulus environment. So it's very interesting and very intricate how this relationship between perception, cognition, a response, emotional perception actually affects your responses and your experiential process within virtual reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that some of the disappointment is that there is particularly in the area of game development, because people then think, okay, that's a big public, people who play games, and we can sell all that hardware, and then we can develop the games. But I think that game development, that's what my experience is very hard for VR, mostly not even to make things 3D, but because in a game you often want to focus people's attention on a certain thing, and with a 2D monitor it's much easier to focus attention on a specific thing than in a 3D world where people can look around everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the hardware constraints that go along with that as well. You touched on it slightly there. In that game environment, you can make a very pretty centerpiece for a game, which if someone is going to be looking at that, but in a virtual experience, 180, 360 degrees, when you turn your head and it doesn't really look like it's supposed to, it's going to drag you out of that experience. And you're going to say, ooh, that's not maybe how it's supposed to look. In a game environment or something, it's specifically manipulated to say, make this look pretty, make this look nice. And again, it comes down to a cost and development cycle, I think, for this as well.
Definitely graphics. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a suggestion, but I don't know if you really meant that we have now reached basically a certain static state of the art, so that now the developers would be more on the software, or is there still developments in the hardware as well, and in the tools as well?
Do you want to answer, Salai?
Go ahead. I can briefly mention, sort of chuck it back over to you afterwards. I think this is constantly evolving, and I take Apple's example once again with the Apple Vision Pro. This is their essentially version 1, which they've just released. I certainly hope they're not going to stop there, but this really is sort of ground zero for them and entering into this sort of a market. We got to a point where we thought, oh, these developers aren't really coming out with much more. These hardware manufacturers aren't doing much else. Steam, who created the Steam Deck for people from gaming and, very popular platform online, just announced their new virtual reality headset. We're looking at extended reality goggles. Meta, put billions and billions into this throughout the years.
Yeah, they did, but they now say, okay, we stop with that because it was a waste of money. Basically, that's what they're saying.
Yeah, scaling it back anyway. And you could maybe have a whole conversation about how they've decided to implement this and the idea of the metaverse and how that's been portrayed or received anyway. But specifically from a hardware, to answer your question, then sort of throw this back over to Iffy here. It's both absolutely when we're talking about resolution with screens, when we're talking about field of views. Battery life is a big one. This has been for a long time about how long can something last. Untethered experiences as well. In virtual reality, normally you want to track your space within the real world as well, so that you're not static in a single place, but you can move around and you can experience the world around you. We used to have certain sensors for that. Now we have something called inside-out tracking, whereby the cameras on the headset itself can do that. We're constantly developing these technologies, so it's ease of comfort to the user, but then also the experience as well is being developed. And then likewise, like I've already talked about, software. Absolutely, bring it on. We need more.
Definitely. And also, in the past, we used to have gloves with specific
Oh, yeah.
sensors. We used to then have the controllers. I mean, I started working with the Polemus tracker that you put on the top of the head in a motion capture room. So that the evolution of the technologies is massive. Now we do hand tracking with the same system that Phillip mentioned, the inside out camera tracking, which is it's fascinating. And there's constantly new developments on that scene.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think we have talked enough about the hardware and the possibilities. Phil already mentioned something of an application, in this case in the health domain. But maybe let's focus a bit on that. So what are we actually doing with it? And specifically, I would focus on Tilburg University there. So what are you doing, and maybe other researchers doing with this kind of technology?
Maybe I can start and talk a little bit about the ELSA lab.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is an interesting project about artificial intelligence within the manufacturing industry, and how do we actually implement that. This is where the ELSA comes in play. So it stands for Ethical, Legal, and Societal Acceptance Aspects of Artificial Intelligence and Deployment in the Industry. So we have at the moment some hurdles, some difficulties in the development and application of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence and some of the tools that we currently have in research, but also in laboratories, could be humongously useful in the industry. And they would make that industry, or European industry, much more competitive against the international market. However, we do see things with a more strict critical and analytical point of view, not ourselves as Tilburg University, of course, we also do, but I'm talking about the overall European Union. And we have started looking at the AI Act, labor laws, and the artificial intelligence, and how that impacts on labor overall. So we have a lot of data privacy, data security concerns, and the application of AI with sensors or with the utilization of data from the employees or from the industries can be very difficult at the moment. So the idea for the ELSA lab is that we will utilize virtual reality as a way to simulate an environment in which we can test different scenarios of AI utilization within industrial factory floor scenarios. We do that by utilizing digital twins, which is, in our case, is a replication of the setting in which, let's say, a worker who is assembling some electronics on top of a PCB, as we call it, on a board. They would get some instructions, some assistance, some documentation. These are some real world use cases provided by the industry, our partners. And we can simulate how that would work and how people would react and ask for their feedback and see long term how that affects them and discuss the impact of AI and how we would implement it, what kind of data are needed, and how far can we go with the processing of that data. There's a lot of parameters to investigate. We've started that. And we started looking at these simulation opportunities within virtual reality as a regulatory sandbox.
Clear. Although I think what you mentioned is really virtual reality needed for that.
For our
What does it
case,
contribute?
yes, absolutely. I will explain this. We need to simulate the scenarios that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do in the actual factory floor. Because at the moment, it's impossible. It's restricted. It's not secure. But we can extract that data in a laboratory environment. And in order to simulate how the factory floor looks like or feels like, what kind of processes are taken into action, we will do that in virtual reality. That's the idea. It's the facilitator of the laboratory setting creation.
Okay. Good. Phil.
Yeah, I can go into a little bit then. It's maybe not so much with an AI mind on this, but specifically how we are using virtual reality in these healthcare applications, like I did briefly mention earlier.
Yeah.
For the last 3 years now, myself, Erica Fukuda from Cognitive Science is the other department, Mercedes Almeida from Cognitive Neuroscience, and Alexandra Hering from Developmental Psychology. The four of us have been doing something called the Digital Interventions Incubator for the last 3 years. The idea from this in its infancy was a internship agreement between cross-school, cross-faculty, so that we could have psychology students develop or ideation of intervention, and then we can use our more technological-minded students at CSAI to implement some of these as internship projects. The success of this has actually spawned out now into the involvement and collaboration with multiple other departments and schools throughout the university, external sort of clinical applications within the Netherlands and beyond as well. And yeah, we're a good team now. We're writing grants and we're actually hiring developers to create applications which we can use in clinical practice, scientifically backed, and with the student focus in mind as well, so that we really hopefully can show a pipeline from that ideation to clinical use.
Okay. So when we talked a little bit before, and you also mentioned research into avatars, or am I incorrect here?
Yes, I think we were talking about the future of AI and VR, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of different avenues that we see virtual reality and AI being used, and I think virtual avatars or virtual agents, as we call them, really are taking a big role here. We spoke before with Phillip, but with other colleagues as well, in Tilburg University. How would it be possible to create more content? And this is a big bottleneck at the moment. We wish we had a team that would be able to actually create from scratch some of the materials we need for the experiment. At the moment, we do that in our laboratory, but it would be ideally a bigger effort. But going back to AI, I think this is where generative AI and the creation of content comes in place, and also the realization of virtual agents and this communication. We already have some examples of that. So we already have the integration of LLMs and existing, let's say, ChatGPT 4.0 has been implemented within virtual reality. My actual PhD, Suhana Biswas, has done that and she's presenting one of her paper next week in the Artificial Intelligence Extended Reality Conference. So there's a lot of advancements there. But what does it mean for us? I think it allows us to create more realistic scenarios, more naturalistic interaction. Yeah, I can talk and talk about this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe as well with the project you told me about before, where you're collaborating with Kiana on sort of virtual humans as well, and that's sort of a bit of a
Absolutely.
hot topic as well at the moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very hot topic. There's a lot of conferences that have workshops about this, but also main tracks just on virtual agents. So we see this evolution from focusing on certain applications to actually focusing now on specific components of virtual reality simulation. So I think there's a lot of aspects here that we are considering, not just how an agent looks, but how it behaves, how it responds, how it can actually induce emotional reaction to users, how it can appear more realistic. There's a lot of different avenues of research that we are exploring. Um, we're also very passionate about physiological and objective measurement in our lab, the Extended Reality Lab in Mind Labs, but also in all of these projects, because it provides this additional perhaps, may I say, more objective measurement of the reaction of users, of participants in the side of virtually generated content. But it can also give us a little bit of an insight. What does that mean for the wellness and well-being overall? So that connects and links back to some of the projects that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I don't know, I shouldn't be the one asking the questions, I don't think, but I'd like to ask Iffy a bit of a question on what she just said then. The dangers of this, right? When we're talking about generative AI content, we've seen this in the news a lot with deepfakes and stuff like this. Is there an inherent risk in virtual environments for this sort of stuff? I don't think we're at that stage yet where we're having Gen AI created content necessarily for VR applications, but we said earlier about how immersive this is and present it is. That's a danger, right?
But are we far from that? I don't think we are.
No, I don't think you are either.
Yeah.
Actually, I just reviewed a paper where somebody basically that was about adapting applications automatically from a 2D environment to a 3D environment. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And not too long ago, there was a lot of hype in the Gaussian splatting, and still is. I mean, in the IEEE VR conference, which is a virtual reality conference on that aspect,
Yeah.
we had a keynote about this. So it's the ability. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I'll try to explain it as best as I can. The ability to take images, 2D images, and translate that into three-dimensional environment vertices. Um, However, this does not allow for the animation of those or the disambiguation of where one object ends and where it starts. Of course, there's a lot of research now that is able to do object detection and surface extraction, etc. We are not there yet. So I think we're not far from, but we're not there yet. There's a lot of research on this area, and I think a lot of the big companies will actually put some more effort into generating 3D content from 2D very, very soon.
Yeah, I've seen it with movies already, which is not 100% accurate. If it would be hard to estimate this, but it's pretty good,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah,
And surprisingly, just free applications which can do that for you.
Yes. It can generate, as I said, the three-dimensional mesh, but it would be different if you wanted to, let's say, pick this glass of water I have on the table, then it would mean that I have to have the whole three-dimensional object here, so I can look at it from every perspective and interact with it.
Yeah, I understand that a movie would be very different from an application where you have to interact with. Yeah, a movie can also fix if something is not really correct.
Exactly.
But yeah, that might be actually that you often see that the first big step where you do 90% of the stuff, that is the easy step, and then the last bit is the hard step to fix the last little bits. And of course, this is still a big step to go from 2D images to an actually 3D representation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brings up another issue. Sorry, I don't know if I want to jump off this topic as well, but I mentioned a lot of big companies earlier developing these sort of headsets. There are many other big companies training these models on data that we are providing to it as well. At what point, though, do we then create a dependency on this and taking it away from the content creators and developers as well? It's maybe not a topic for virtual reality and AI, but it's certainly something when we are very reliant on that and we push all of our creative juices out to these models. When do we, what control do we have at some point?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and one that I would like to do a couple of podcasts.
And I'm certainly probably not the person to.
I don't know.
Well,
The thing is with this topic, and I think actually virtual reality is a good view because there needs to be a lot of content needs to be created for virtual reality.
Sure.
And one issue maybe why it is not that prevalent in virtual reality yet is that there is not that much content to train on. So that means that creativity is maybe limited to creating virtual avatars or something like that, but not whole new applications. But yeah, I think this is indeed a big issue that well, there are lots of issues. One issue is people who work in this area, what they enjoy is the creative aspect. They don't enjoy fixing what the computer does wrong.
Yeah.
So that is one aspect. You take away the fun part from people. You say you do the stupid part, the computer will do the fun part. And the other thing is the stagnation. That everything will be the same, especially maybe in a relatively young topic as virtual reality, because you train on a few things and then those things will get imitated. So you don't see the new things coming any. But that maybe is then an opportunity for humans again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think creativity will not stop when virtual reality is so much needed. And for the past years, I mean, we've always had a team. Someone would do the 3D models, someone would do the texture, someone would do the shaders, someone would do the lighting, you name it. There was so many specializations. Now I see a lot more people who have a little bit of everything in order to manage to stay in virtual reality area. And this is actually fascinating because if AI can assist them, they can produce faster. So I see this as a tool. I also see that we're talking about adaptive environments because the real-time aspect of virtual reality is what makes it so interactive and immersive and interesting, right? So this adaptiveness, being able to create personalized experience, as they call it, or user adaptive experiences. And for example, we had projects in which the content would change slightly based on the stress of the user. Heart rate variability, or emotional reactions. And of course, that comes with some limitations or some risks, because of course, personalized environments could be also used as a manipulation process. We have been from Tilburg University stance very critical towards anything that utilizes personal data or could be used for the wrong reasons. And maybe in that framework, I can mention the REDIS, the Academic Collaborative Center for Resilient and Democratic Society, because it actually looks into these aspects for the 4 different themes. And yeah, whoever is interested in these 4 themes, they can come to us and we can discuss further some of these aspects.
Yeah, so you say come to us. That was one question I had here. Okay, you mentioned a couple of times that there is a lab. So people come, if you walk into the lab, what do you see? What is there?
So I'd recommend for anyone go onto Google and search virtual reality lab mind labs. I'm sure it will pop up and well, you might see my face, good or bad, but you'll see us there and there'll be some contact information at the bottom if anyone's interested in topics we're discussing here. And it'll give you sort of a brief look into what our lab is. It's a multitude of equipment, it's headsets, it's sensors. We have a was a 6-camera, now it's an 8-camera motion capture system that goes around the perimeter of the lab now. We've just had a great internship student, Ant, who's just even been able to create motion capture content and translate it into virtual reality environments, essentially at a click of a button. And so this is sort of where we're going with it. It's that integration of all of these sensors, all of this equipment. We have a small, fairly primitive driving simulator setup as well in there. Iffy, anything else I'm forgetting?
I guess some of the physiological sensing and how we create the custom setup so that we can track this, because it's another thing saying, okay, I'm going to use, I don't know, electromyography or encephalography and record these signals, and another thing to do that in virtual reality. There's so many other factors involved. So we have expertise in that area, and we're able to help and facilitate some of that research.
Yeah, I can see a certain application here. When I came to Tilburg University, it was about 15 years ago, I believe. People heard that I was interested in gaming, and I got a couple of people coming to me and said, look, well, we have usually from the psychology or the sociology department, and they said, well, we do research where we want to see people's reactions to things, so we give them a written description and they have to tell us how they feel about it. Can't we do this in a game? Not that we have been able to do much there, because I also think that at that time a game would not have added that much. A little bit, because you can see things rather than a description, and maybe you can do some interaction. But you mentioned that the big advantage of virtual reality is the immersiveness. So do you get people wanting to do this kind of research with you, or should they come to you to do this kind of research?
I think so, absolutely, right?
I can maybe give a quick example, actually, that maybe touches on this quite well. It's another project myself and Iffy are involved in, along with Nina Cooper over in TSB. And it's called Furby, a lovely acronym that Iffy came up with. And it's specifically looking at multimodal sensor integration in virtual environments and creating a framework for that. So what that essentially means is we've got lots of information. How do we synchronize that? And how do we are able to maybe look at an event output at the end of it and say, this happened here, and this was the response to that from the user. One such application, which we've looked into before, is the TRIA social stress test. You traditionally would have a panel of people in real life, you interview them, and you maybe ask them quite tricky questions, and you measure how they respond to that. Now, having a panel of people to be able to do that in a real world environment might be quite time consuming, quite costly. So if virtual reality is immersive, is presence inducing, why can't you do that in a virtual environment instead? And so maybe that's exactly what we're going to be doing. And you can look out for that if the student's listening to this, to a study upcoming soon. But I've not just given the game away. But it's perfect examples. It's psychological experiments sometimes that you really can manipulate, that you can control yourself. And, okay, maybe we actually want to change this. We want to see that response instead. We want to look at this instead. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit like a Plato's cave virtual reality, isn't it? But you know that everything is fake, and all the shadows are there, but they're not really real. And then you can unplug at any point, but you can create whatever cave you want. So for us, it's so fascinating. And I think because of our experience with all the problematic factors in the past, all the hardware issues, all the middleware issues, I think that's why we came up with this solution. Let's create something that other researchers can use in the future, and they can develop without any issues, or they can design without having to worry about how one hardware will communicate with the other. And of course, we're not going to go and develop something that is customer ready, but we're talking about a framework here, and we actually should invite other researchers who have been working maybe along this line for open source software, and they would be happy to collaborate with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something we had a conversation this morning about this. It's creating these systems open for other people. So it's all well and good us developing something like this, but how can this extend beyond our lab? How can other researchers access this, and how do we do this in a sustainable fashion as well, so that we don't keep reinventing the wheel every time a researcher wants to be able to do something? We can make an adaptive system whereby, again, we iterate upon that.
Okay, well, I think that's a very good place to end it, unless you have something that you want to add here.
For myself, I think we covered all of my topics.
We thank you very much for the invitation.
Hosting us, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there was a lot of information compressed in about 45 minutes, but I hope that this is inspiring for especially people who do research where they need this kind of immersive technology, that they would see that it's possible at least in Tilburg.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I said earlier, search the lab. You will find all the contact information there if any of this does sound appealing to you, and get in touch with Ifi or myself as well. We're always open.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.